Hello, everyone. It is with great excitement that I welcome the AI in Oceans panel, moderated by Sandra Ponce de Leon. Sandra, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Molly. It's so great to be here, and I'm so excited. This panel has amazing and very esteemed technologists and ocean experts, and we are going to learn all about how AI specifically can help save the ocean. So I'm going to let all of my panelists do a short introduction, and then we'll come back to the conversation. So with that, why don't we have Tom begin? I know, Tom, you wanted to share a slide. Why don't we have you present? This is Tom Duncan, the CEO and founder of Earthblanc.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Oh gosh.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, so here we have the Earthblanc app. Now, what we do in Earthblanc, we use AI and satellite data to monitor fisheries off a vast mangrove forest in India. Now, the way we do that, we take high-resolution data from satellites. We then use machine learning and AI algorithms to check what is the biosignal coming out of that zone in terms of the different types of bird noises that coming out of that mangrove forest. That infers how much the population of fish is in that ocean right there and spawning in the forest, and that predicts what type of fisheries catch you're going to expect. Now, what we do is we actually have a payments technology where fishermen and fisher families, they can actually make a payment face-to-face using Earthbank's digital banking app and face-to-face payments with the QR code. Once they complete the transaction and basically, here's the receive button. Okay, I'm going to receive, $50 for my box of fish. Here's the receipt. And it brings up a QR code. Now, what the person who's buying the fish, they scan the QR code, and essentially what happens then is they print out a QR code, put it on the box of fish, and we put that as one unit of information, the payment and the box of fish and the location and all the biosignal data and predictions associated with. So what we can do with that is have an ethical supply chain in the most rural, remote places you can imagine. So that's kind of how we're going about this process of using AI, machine learning, and digital payments for the unbanked and underbanked to make sure that we can get ethical supply chains to them. We have a nonprofit called Worldview Impact Foundation, and Earthblanc is the venture, and it's a partnership between the two to roll this out. So we've got 164,000 customers there in India, and we're onboarding probably about 1 million this year, and so growing fast because there's a lot of demand. So yeah, I'd love to partner up with lots of folks, and yeah, happy to answer more questions later.
Okay, I'm back.
I'm not sure if I've used up all my 3 minutes or not.
You were great. Let me just mute myself here. Actually, apologies. There's always some technical difficulties. Okay. Yeah, so thank you so much, Tom. I love what you're doing. Can you guys hear me okay? Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Panelists? Okay, great.
Yes.
Why don't we hand it over to Jeremy McCain and tell us all about where you are and what you're up to with regards to the oceans.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jeremy McCain. Thanks for having me on. I'm just a geek. I love playing around with data. And a couple years ago at the World Economic Forum, my colleagues and I have created a concept where we could actually create a network where we could store ocean data that we collect with a number of different ways, buoys, sensors, whatnot, and then also data that exists right now that you can have open access to. We wanted to build a network where we could not only store it based on a series of confirmations on our distributed blockchain, but we also wanted a tool that we could actually start to measure and quantify the value of life that was in marine protected areas. The purpose being, to prove to these sovereign nation states that we were working with that they were worth more alive than dead. So right now, we derive value from extracting dead bodies from the marine areas. We want to show countries and other businesses that data is the new gold. And so that's the basis. And then on top of gathering this data and having a more of a understanding of what's happening in the oceans, we also thought, well, there's no way that we could ever kind of protect 30% of the world's oceans if we don't also enforce it. And sadly, many places don't have the capacity building necessary for enforcing. So we built dual systems, which we'll talk about later, that not only do scientific studies, but we can actually stop a vessel that is deemed a poach or illegal fishing in its tracks. So, but more about that later.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Yeah, the overfishing of the ocean and the depletion that the ocean is facing is a huge issue. So I'm eager to learn more about that. Let's have our next panelist introduce herself, Dr. ERIKA MONTAGUE from the Schmidt Foundation. Please give us an intro.
Great. Thanks, Sandra. Thanks for inviting us. My name is ERIKA MONTAGUE, and I'm the Chief Technologist for Schmidt Marine Technology Partners, and we fund ocean solutions. So we believe that there is a lot of technology that could enable a healthier ocean, and we fund primarily right now in 4 different categories broadly. So sustaining fisheries, so that's creating transparency in the seafood supply chain, finding, and to some of the points of the panelists here, illegal fishing, identifying that and tracking it. We also fund enabling ocean research. So those are tools and technologies that basic scientific researchers need access to understand our oceans better. We also fund marine plastic solutions. And a lot of this we believe is an upstream issue. So we fund a lot of land-based solutions around that. And then finally, habitat health. So types of technology, either high-level tech or low-level tech that can secure a healthier and better habitat. And one of my favorite projects, really quick, that I'll talk about is planting 1 million corals, where one of our researchers figured out a way to microfragment corals so they grow an order of magnitude quicker. And so now that we can grow out our coral reefs much faster. And that's just one example of one type of tech. Everywhere to that, to large instrumentation that can understand microplastics in the ocean and their distribution. So we're trying to look at this and understand this problem from many, many different ways. And of course, AI comes into play in a lot of it because big data is just part of technology.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you were talking about Dr. David Vaughan, the Plant 1 Million Corals Foundation. Yeah. Yes, I love his story and just how he happened upon this ability to grow coral at a much faster rate, and it was all because of an accident that happened in his lab. So yeah. I just really love the origin story for that, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit more. Marie, why don't you give us an introduction to yourself, CIO at Data360, and your work with Data360?
Yes, so hey everyone, my name is Marie. I'm with Data360, and we focus on, we're a deep tech company, and that means we use AI and machine learning to solve some of the world's biggest problems. And so one of our moonshot problems is to help with climate change and fixing the world's oceans and the human factor. So what we do is we actually track across the entire internet genome. We track all the conversations about climate change, about the ocean, and try to find out what the misalignments are with those things, and how we can better model systems, workflow, processes, organizational collaborations, UN Sustainable Development Goals, any kind of model and system that we can actually better sort of play matchmaker, right, between all the different organizations and issues and help them find better alignment. And if we have time, I could share the graphic I did last year as well that focuses around that, because it's so important that we just don't have, as a human race, we don't have the right alignments between people and researchers and funding and so many different places. And AI, machine learning, and big data can fix a lot of that. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Marie. Yeah, I think a lot of
the issues are that we don't have a lot of the data, right, available at our fingertips, and there's so much we don't know about the ocean. So I'd love to just start with, sort of a baseline, how can AI help us get a better understanding of what's actually happening below the surface, so we can actually start to develop these technologies that can, help us. I think that maybe Jeremy or ERIKA might be good to jump in there. Jeremy?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of things. I mean, I guess when I think about the motivation that I have, it's really, to be honest with you, it's out of frustration. I've got some really great scientists that I work with. We're working directly now. We've got the Gerges Laboratory at Harvard University, and we've been tasked with gathering all this data, right? And then now, what do you do with it, right? There's just not enough people in the world to really parse this data. So artificial intelligence, specifically machine learning, and going even further, deep learning, gives us the ability to really start to kind of look at the trends of what's actually happening. I would say the biggest frustration is not being measured. Was it Lord Kelvin said something to the fact that if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it? Well, we know that our oceans need to be improved. So we really should have better measurements. And so right now, I would stay, and maybe ERIKA, you can correct me on this, but I really feel like we have low resolution, low frequency data. And what I mean by that is I have access to a lot of this oceanic data, but it might be sitting on a vessel somewhere on a hard drive that I might get in 6 months. I equate that to weather data, right? I want to know about the tornado that's about to hit my house in 15 minutes, not the one that came over here 6 months ago. So if we can have high resolution, high frequency data, and then we can process this with these algorithms that we're working on, then I think we get a better understanding, not just of the potential risks, but we also have a better idea of the environment as a whole, and really, exploration. I mean, we know more about space than we do on our oceans, and I think that's a crime.
Absolutely. ERIKA, is there some exciting developments that you're seeing on the AI side for data collection around the ocean?
Yeah, I mean, to Jeremy's point, so Pete Gerges is one of our advisors, and I've known him as a colleague for 20 years now. He's just a fantastic researcher, very forward-thinking. And I think that there is sort of a two-pronged issue when it comes to data. So there is a huge repository of historic data that will really understand what we're looking at now and then moving forward. And so to truly understand those trends, we need to be able to dig into those data. And the only way we can really do that is through something like AI. But the second component is having that sort of very quick on-demand responsiveness. And the dirty secret about technology in the ocean and all the robotics and the sensors and the imagery is that they are hugely massive amounts of data. And there's no individual that can go through that in any kind of timely response. And there's a lot of stuff sitting out there unused. And so in order to really make the most out of these new types of instruments and the new technology that's coming on board, we also need to be able to enable new ways in which to process it and understand it, both historically and into the future, and also immediately right now. And so along those lines, yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff. There's a lot of autonomy that's happening in the ocean at the moment through robotics, where real time that robot can decide to sample or not sample, because everything in the ocean is still limited. No matter how great our tools become, they're limited by battery, time, and storage. So these robots are making quick decisions to say, do I want to go over and sample in this area? Do I want to take more data in this area? Will this be important to the researcher? Will this be important to information about weather? And so enabling those systems to make those decisions without us directly in the loop, so then later we can go back and process them in a meaningful way, has been exciting. And so there's lots of examples around that, but that's sort of the bigger picture on it.
Yeah, and of course with the ocean, it's always moving, it's always changing. How do you actually collect a data sample and then know that that's going to be valid for the time being or for whatever function you need to process? And I think that the swarm technology is also something kind of interesting, exciting for that particular use case. Marie or Tom, do you want to chime in on how you're establishing a baseline of data and how you're using that for your technologies?
Yeah, sure, I can add to that. Go ahead.
Sure, go for it.
Okay.
Oh,
Marie,
okay.
why don't you go? Marie, why don't
We're
you go?
both very polite.
Ladies first, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, one of the things we're doing with the internet genome is looking at major issues and then collecting. So the internet genome is just a big old mess, right? It's just a hodgepodge of a lot of things organized from many different points of view. So first, we're looking at what are the different points of view for a particular subject, like the oceans, right? So one of the things that we did last year, let me actually share my screen here.
Oh, cool.
Is we talked about kind of like the misalignment between the public and researchers. And so, researchers are kind of focused, and this is true even with COVID-19 right now, and a number of things. So researchers are very narrowly focused. So at the time when we looked at healthindex.org, there was only 7 topics that the researchers were looking at, but when we looked at the public, they were looking at 20 plus topics. And when we looked at, the number of researchers focused on an average subject, it was like up to 29, but the people that were focused on ocean, climate, and whatever were like 1 million people, right? So there's a huge misalignment between like what research is doing and how narrow they are and how broad the public is. And there's just not enough structures or organizations to really help people understand how to affect change and how to connect with the research, how to put the research into their hands. So how do you then begin to build communication systems that close that gap? And how do you also begin to share knowledge in such a way that if there's something from an ocean robot that needs to be shared, that people can act upon, or people can help volunteer for, or people can form organizations around, that gets to people in a timely manner. So that's some of the stuff we're doing now. Our companies partner with Microsoft, and we're focused on building out, very large, what are called knowledge centers or knowledge computers or cognitive computing, to be able to track massive amounts of information and actually reformulate it on a real-time basis into these different models that are relative to the viewer, relative to the person looking at it.
So are you looking to use this data and provide it to the media so that they can better respond to the consumer demand?
To everyone. The goal is everyone. So the goal is, whether it's the activist, right, or it's the nonprofit, or it's the media. Part of the problem with communication, even in 2020, is that it's siloed still into so many factions. Even though we have a lot more broader perspectives because of social media, we have a lot more distribution of information. There could be a lot more. And also a system that focuses on actual fixing of problems versus just sort of selling ads. Systems that actually help us find out where the problems are and troubleshoot those problems and be able to deal with those things. So our company's, really focused on, how do you reinvent workflow? How do you reinvent search engines so that problems can be fixed, right? How do you take different issues and give people access? And how do you dynamically change those? And also, really wonderful things like in cognitive computing, you can immediately translate between languages, between users right away without having to hit a translate button. It just automatically, not just on the page, but in the video in real time, translate issues and be able to share knowledge regardless of what a language a person speaks. Those things are huge because we have to, we all share the ocean, right? Just like we all share this crisis. And if we don't have tools that actually help us communicate more effectively, it's gonna be a hard road, right? It's a hard, long road because we all live in these bubbles, and big data allows us to look outside of our own limited perspectives and be able to handle a lot more information quickly because the computers can assist us, like Jeremy was saying, with big data and cognitive computing, and specifically deep learning. We can handle a lot more information a lot more quickly and get to the issues and help each other.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that a lot of it is probably, talking in a language that consumers or, just the general public can probably understand, and just taking it down a notch from being so scientific.
And AI can actually do that. AI can actually take the level of grammar. It can simplify the grammar. It can recommend different levels of grammar. It can recommend the words that are used. It can point to, if someone's more visually oriented, it can point to visuals. If someone has a disability, it can help augment that disability. I mean, it's just really wonderful. And part of the reason why I didn't join the board. I keep saying Microsoft, but the part of the reason why we joined Microsoft was because they're really, Satya is really hip to equal access, and helping people with disabilities and helping people with different language barriers, and really helping the planet get better.
Yeah.
And so that was something we hadn't heard from any of our other partners. And so we really have gone into how do we work together as one of the partners to create these new systems.
That's great. Congratulations on that partnership.
Thank you.
Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Earthblanc and how you're dealing with data and AI with the mangroves?
Yeah. Mangroves is a really interesting use case for AI and machine learning, and how to incentivize local communities to actually restore and conserve their mangroves, because mangroves are the spawning grounds for a lot of fish. They're the habitat for a lot of really important species. And so with mangrove destruction, you get a really degraded marine ecosystem. So we've worked hard. We did a partnership last year. Well, we were at X Prize, AI for Good, and we presented this thing called the Mangrove Moonshot. Like, what if you restored 100 billion or 200 billion mangroves around the world? Well, you would sequester the same amount of carbon as 1 trillion trees that ETH Zurich sort of came up with that pretty viral campaign. So mangroves, I'll just show briefly a little video about some of our work. It just explains, and I'll just talk, can you see that there? Yeah.
Yep.
So we've been working on a few sites, Myanmar, through Worldview Impact Foundation. What we did was we got a drone from Biocarbon Engineering, which one of our Earthblanc co-founders is previously worked at Biocarbon Engineering, and we planted mangroves with drones that can plant 100,000 trees a day. And we found, okay, what we need to do is incentivize these communities. And so what we did was we did a blended capital model of financing local communities to become sustainable fisher families, artisanal, as opposed to chopping down the wood and of mangroves for less than $1 a day often. And then we would combine it with finance, and we pay communities to plant trees. We then share carbon revenue 50-50, and that's how we basically incentivize communities to step up, get involved in our programs, get involved in our loan programs, and then they get the share of the revenue. So they get about 3 years worth of salary when they join our carbon program, which is huge. That's like getting a little mini pension fund. So that's kind of where we're at there. So that's the project in Myanmar. And I will just stop sharing that. So we're getting drone data from there, and we're then comparing that with all the 3D and 26 different spectral layers, comparing it to satellite data and seeing what's the actual difference between the drone data and the satellite data, and how much soil is being built and how much extra carbon are we not even measuring. Because the more carbon we measure, the more revenue the community gets from the carbon credits through the voluntary carbon standards. So, instead of 3 years salary, then they may end up getting more like 6 to 9 years salary, which is effectively a pension fund. So that's kind of, there's a lot of data, and we need to get really good at measuring carbon. Then there's the second and third order effects of seagrasses, which adds up to a total of 40 to 50x the amount of carbon that a normal forest has. So if we can really nail down this model as an incentive model for local communities, this is kind of it. And when you combine it with the sustainable fisheries as well, we've been in discussion with IUCN about setting up these trust funds for fisher families, like about $5,000 to delay your catch 1 year, let it recover, protect the mangroves, everyone's winning. So that's where we're sort of bringing, we need AI and ML to kind of, get much better learning outcomes from the carbon measurements, and therefore monetization of ecosystem services. So that's kind of how we're going about the problem, as well as what I described earlier with the supply chain tracking. That does go onto a blockchain as well. I wanted to say we're using a central bank blockchain in Europe at the moment to sort of timestamp the carbon data to these mini green digital bonds that we're creating through this program with Earthbank and Worldview Impact Foundation. So it's a little bit innovative, and there's a lot of moving parts. But if we didn't have the AI ML component to figure out the carbon measurement, well, we couldn't really dig through all the data and prove that there's 50x more carbon in there and therefore more revenue for local communities. So it's a key critical component.
Wow, that's really, really awesome. I love it. And mangroves are play such a huge part in the carbon cycle and carbon sequestration. And of course, we know that the ocean and land are tied together. So everything we do on land affects the ocean. I guess one thing that I really wanted to talk about with all of you is, since we are in the middle of this pandemic and all at home, no one's driving, I think that we can assume that the carbon emissions have gone down a bit. I mean, what do you guys think? How is this going to impact the ocean, for good? Let's see, who wants to take that? Let's see if ERIKA, you want to take that question and tell us your thinking about how this is impacting the ocean's health, what we're going through.
My thinking around it and a lot of discussions we've had within the team are around any sort of major event where it's an opportunity to move one direction or the other. And so this is potentially a great opportunity for us to change or modify the way we're doing things, to take the initiative, to take the momentum we have right now to slow down and to do things more locally. But it's also an opportunity for large corporations and people that are not in as much of a privileged situation to be taken advantage of coming out of this, because there are going to be a lot of folks that are in like a very desperate situation in a lot of these regions where they live and depend on the ocean. And so I think it really very much makes a difference on how we pivot around this. But a good example would be the fisheries. So right now the fisheries are really struggling because the way the supply chain is set up, because they have to transport everything. A lot of fishermen cannot get access to areas. However, if we change the way in which we eat protein out of the ocean, if we eat locally, if the supply chain supplies locally, then that benefits the fishermen, and it also benefits the environment, and it benefits us. And so we have looked into funding some of these local efforts actually around education about the fact that there are local fish that you can eat and you can access from local fishermen, and then that reduces the CO2 footprint. And so solutions along those lines and how we deal with the supply chain are one fantastic example of ways in which we can really improve things. And so that still requires an understanding of how people are interacting with that supply chain and getting those metrics, sort of like what Tom was saying, having those databases, understanding like where people are pulling from and giving them the opportunity to make informed decisions. And so I do think this is a big opportunity right now, and it's really how we choose to play it out on many, many, many levels. Yeah, not just the tech and the science, but globally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that you touch on the incentivization aspect as well. And I know, Jeremy, with your technology, that plays a big part in actually bringing the fishermen into, being able to monetize on, the beautiful asset that they have there. So can you tell us a little bit about your work there?
Yeah. So, I mean, and also in relation to the pandemic, I mean, you asked a really great question. I mean, it's what we're all thinking about, right? I mean, it's really the reason why we're in this situation is because of our improper relationship with wildlife and their habitats, and as long as we continue this rat race, we're going to always find other pandemics. We have to change our behavior. Our culture is what's broken. In regards to fishermen and incentivizing them, one of the things that we're working on right now is as we collect this data, we're using a number of different things. We're using TensorFlow to be able to recognize visually different types of fish. I determine how many times we see them with all the buoys and the autonomous systems that we've put in place. And then on top of that, we're now, I think the field that I'm most excited about in terms of AI is environmental DNA. And so what we've done is we've done a number of samples in Jamaica. We've pulled water samples and we've cross-referenced different types of genomes that we're specifically looking for that we know that are high value targets for these countries. So that would be like your grouper, your snapper, and then your pelagics would be kind of like your tuna and your marlin, whatever, right?
Can you explain what environmental DNA is exactly?
Yeah. So like everywhere we go, like if we, I guess environmental DNA could be like the lab laptop that you left, and I'm sucking up little pieces of you that you've left behind, hair or whatever. I can go back and I can look and I can say, oh, now that I have Sandra's genome, I actually can identify that that was in fact her here. There are also the same thing happens when animals get eaten by a shark and they're shredded to bits, and bits of pieces of them are floating through the ocean. Their DNA is being spread all throughout the ocean. Well, the problem right now, what we really would want to do is, obviously, in a perfect world, we'd love to be able to count fish by DNA. It's not going to happen because you have time and space, and that makes things really kind of a mess. But what's really interesting is that we've actually kind of played around with matching basically vertebrate samples with gut microbial DNA to be able to match and try to figure out which is the most recent. When we start to kind of figure out, these water samples that we're taking, instead of going back and counting fish the old way, which I kind of skipped over. I actually learned about this process. I was sailing through the Lao group with the chief, the paramount chief of the Lao group, Rakasau, and I said to him, I said, "Can you explain me this concept of tambu, which just means taboo or forbidden, right?" He says, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, we cut off the area when we have not so much fish, and then when we go back, we count the fish, and then when the fish are many, we release the tambu, we go fishing." And I started asking marine scientists around the world, I say, "Do we go and count fish?" He said, "Well, kind of, we count fish." But so I figured I probably couldn't really get kids excited about leaving college and coming and scuba diving with me and counting fish. But maybe, just maybe, we could start to build technology in situ that we could actually start to process environmental DNA in a more rapid fashion than what we can do now. So I think, we're still years away from really being able to pull that concept off. But I think where the real value for us in relation to your question is, I can now go back to these countries and I can say, okay, we're doing all these different data sets, and these are all these different types of things. And there's all these confirmations. And by the way, we were the first ones in the world to actually use the ERC 721 protocol for the oceans on the Ethereum blockchain. And what we did is we created basically a deed for every 1 square kilometer of ocean. And then what we started to do is we started to assign these variables to each one of these areas. So what we would do is we'd say, okay, well, we found that there might be this many fish in this particular section of the ocean at any given time, right? So it's just the numbers are amortized over a period of, say, 12 months or whatever. The idea is that we get some point in the future, we could go back and say, okay, in this area, out of all the testing that we've done, maybe we have anywhere from 150 to $200 million worth of natural capital assets. Then we can start to look at other types of monetization. We can create blue bonds to be able to create collateral to be able to say, hey, we're going to put a lien on this water. We're going to stop people from coming in there and going fishing while we allow it to regenerate. Anyway, I could go on, but that I really feel like, incentivizing, fishermen's fisheries is really important, because if we're going to tell somebody that, hey, we need to protect 30% of the world's oceans by 2030, don't fish. Well, we can't remove one economic driver without reinserting another economic driver. And that's really at the core of what we're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing. Well, I think we talked about, how the technology can motivate and incentivize people to act in a certain way. Marie, what are you learning about the pandemic? And do you think that we're going to go back to, our bad ways and bad habits? Or, is this really just forcing us to, start to behave better and have a better relationship with our planet?
Yeah, I think, I'm really excited because we in LA, we happen to have a very dynamic sort of happening mayor that's really hip to climate change and innovation and technology, and also happens to be on the president of the board for the Metro. And so for the first time, I think in LA, we have direct evidence of reducing our carbon footprint and what it means. And, we have some of the worst traffic in the country. Elon Musk is working on a tunnel to go through a few different areas. Uber's working on helicopters and personal transportation. We're working on how to make the port cleaner and safer. We have an environmental council. There's so many different things happening in LA, but for the first time, there's a focus on the actual data, because we have direct data from what happened during this pandemic and how it affected LA. I think LA had the first clean air days in, dozens, if not 50 years. So, you know, it's phenomenally exciting because at a civic level, you know, we can present that and create policies and rapidly innovate using the analysis of that data and also looking at the modeling of how the systems work and things like that. And we also have a number of innovations that happen between, you know, startups and small businesses and the actual agencies. So, you know, luckily we have some shortcuts through some of the bureaucratic tape to actually have dialogues rapidly with government agencies, with the people who put out the RFPs, with the people who make the policies, with corporations. There's quite a collaboration happening here. So I think it's actually a really exciting time because, you know, we weren't going to have this data otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
LA was going to keep being LA and it was going to be a slow road. So, you know, it's one of the most polluting cities in the world. You know, I think is, you know, a miraculous side effect to a really terrible situation.
That's true. Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. Tom, how are things in Australia? I know you're also part of some really cool eco communities there.
Oh yeah. So I mean, I was in San Francisco, and then being Australian, I got this message. The Australian government said, if you don't come back to Australia, we may not let you back in for like a very long time. So I had to kind of rush back to Australia, and was in quarantine for 3 weeks. And then I was like, okay, I've got to get out of the city. And like 2 decades ago, I was quite involved with, you know, environmental, eco-village, eco-neighborhood developments, grow your own food, be fully self-sufficient. And so some of my friends have kind of kept going on that track, and they're like, hey, do you need a place to stay? And I'm like, yes, please. So very lucky to be on, you know, a self-sufficient farm. It's got its own water catchment. You know, it grows, you know, 2 acres of organic market gardens, fully self-sufficient. Now we haven't applied any AI yet, but I've got to say, just wow, I feel like this is something that if we can learn about local food supply chains, like out of this, and like having locally resilient food supply, this is going to be key. I think in the next couple of years, people are going to be waking up to just how important that local resilience is. And maybe, you know, I would love to see some, you know, really innovative models come out of this of like, how could we optimize our local food supply chain and apply deep tech to this, you know, really important emerging topic. So I hope we can use this as a learning process. And, you know, let's start the local food revolution. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the beauty of it is that it's really a convergence, right? I mean, the topic of this panel is, can AI save the ocean? But, you know, we're talking about blockchain, AI, IoT, and then also, you know, human behavior, changing human behavior. So I think it's
Right.
not just one thing that's going to save the ocean, obviously, but there are some, you know, promising signs. And there was a recent article and study that came out that said that the ocean could be rehabilitated by 2050. So that gives us some hope.
Totally. Yeah. One more thing,
Yeah,
Sandra, just on this topic. I did do some quantitative modeling, like back in 2007 for the local water authority, and you know, it's a 1.3 million hectare catchment. It's very large, so I have massive data sets. Back then, you know, AI and machine learning was just so really early on. So it was really complex to do that. And it was only through a lot of local ground truthing and grab sampling in waterway quality that we could tell exactly how all of the land management interventions were actually saving Port Phillip Bay from all the nitrogen and phosphorus runoff. So like being high up in the catchments, the more you can actually work back up into the catchments and have regenerative agriculture, you know, you're just not having the erosion runoff, you're not having the nitrogen runoff, and therefore all of your seagrasses are not going to die and have a toxic bloom event. So, you know, I mean, back in 2007, we set up this thing called the Eco Markets, which was a $300 million public-private fund that paid farmers ecosystem services to achieve the water quality targets for the bay, which were set by the EPA. And we as the Water Authority had to kind of meet those targets or get, you know, big, heavy fines. So yeah, we had to set up a marketplace and get farmers to bid on that. So this is the kind of thing that I think we need to move to, that kind of model. Like, how do we incentivize farmers, fisheries to kind of work together as a cohesive system if we're going to save the oceans? Because in Australia, the Great Barrier Reef, it's been dying for decades with all the runoff from the sugar cane and the farming. the climate change, global warming is just the thing that was the nail in the coffin, you know. So I think we've got to work all the way back up in the catchments, and that's going to take a lot of pretty seriously complicated modeling to get the science right. But the one thing we did find was if you just have 1% of every single catchment dedicated to wetlands, and it receives all the, 80% of the runoff through those wetlands, you can pretty much save the local oceanic receiving marine waters. So that's like a good rule of thumb that I came out with as a result from that. And I think that's kind of something that we could, I hope comes out of this, that like now we're going to localize food supply chains. Let's like apply this model and know-how.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, it's it needs to be looked at holistically. Everything that we do on land affects the ocean. ERIKA, at the Schmidt Foundation, are you guys also looking at some land-based solutions that impact the ocean?
Absolutely. I mean, so much we talk about the oceans and the problems with the oceans or the solutions in the ocean, but a lot of those solutions are land-based, or a lot of the problems come from land-based issues. So right now, specifically, we decided to identify one area and fund that with a challenge. And so we're doing the nutrient pollution challenge, that is to fund solutions around nitrogen issues, nitrogen runoff, most of it obviously land-based, either through sensor technology, so very novel sensors, so we can understand the flow of this. And this is a perfect example where AI comes in and is so meaningful, to understand like where the basis is of this, how it changes, how it's distributed. Are there incentives, again, that we can give farmers to limit their use of fertilizer and have better practices? Also, in addition, habitat health. So if people have come up with solutions in those, shore-based and more marshland regions to promote better drawdown of nitrogen and CO2. And then finally, looking at stuff like biochar solutions. And so better ways in which to enrich the soil. So all the solutions, we have a challenge right now. We should be announcing the winner come late June, early July. We'll probably have a few. But it's really exciting for us because with our funding, we fund very early stage technology. So we want to fund these solutions that might historically have been a little scary for traditional funders, or especially investors to fund. And we want to find solutions where it's very, very meaningful, low cost tech that can be utilized not just in the States, but globally in all these different regions like Myanmar that have these problems, to really make a real serious global impact. So we're pretty excited about it. We've seen some really, really cool proposals, and we'll let you know who wins in another month or two.
Yeah, please do. Is that are those challenges that happen frequently over the year?
This is the first time we've done a challenge, and by challenge, I should specify that we put this out as an RFP, and either 1 to 4 that we pick as a winner to divvy up the funds will have those funds to create a prototype around this in the next 12 to 18 months. So it's not like an X Prize challenge where they're actually testing against each other's technologies that's already built. This is a challenge to build something new. And we foresee really trying to do this now annually, and maybe even potentially bring in other funders to jump on board with this idea. So we're hoping that we're going down the right path. This is a little bit of a test bed for us too, but we've had really good response around it from a lot of different people, both from funding funders and also from technologists. So we're pretty excited.
Amazing. Yeah, that's great. I mean, the faster these technologies get funded, the faster they can come to market and get accelerated. So I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing. I guess I'd love to just kind of, because I know we're kind of coming up on time for questions, but, is there anything that you guys wanted to touch on that I didn't get a chance to ask you, that you want to highlight about the work that you're doing with the oceans? Perhaps, Jeremy, we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really a challenging kind of thing. I think probably everybody on this panel recognizes how difficult it is. I mean, take us for example. We're in our seed phase right now. We're just about to really get that kicked off. I came from the .com era, right? And I remember watching all these companies say, "Hey, we're trying to raise money," and they were just like, blue sky ideas. When we launched this company, we said before we even start doing this, we want to actually have something that's tangible, something that's working. We want to have relationships in place. So, Tom, I'm going to be in your neck of the woods at some point. We'll probably end up shipping our gear that way because Australia has just opened up and given us the opportunity to do a pilot program out there in Queensland. So I'm really stoked about that. But I think that if there's anybody watching this that's starting up, just know that you set all of your stuff up and hopefully things kind of work out in your favor. For me, it's been probably the greatest challenge because when we first started this was like 2 years ago. We launched this at the World Economic Forum, and I still feel like I'm pregnant with this baby. It's a very long gestation period. Maybe I'm giving birth to a baby giraffe. I don't know. But what we've learned so far is really exciting. And I had a conversation with Dr. Sylvia Earle, and we were talking about doing some stuff in the deep sea. And I said, what's the probability of us discovering a new species? And she said 95%. It's because we just know so little about the deep sea. And so, when we start to think about really where we're at this point in time and what we know, or rather what we don't know, this is an exciting time of human history. Because as she says, now we know, and now we need to act. We need to do something. And so I'm just excited that there's this moment in time where we can take advantage. And you know what? The pandemic, the silver lining to that is we realize that, gosh, you know what? We can actually see, I think, Maria, you mentioned Los Angeles. Hey, it's still not perfect, right? But at the end of the day, we see that the Earth has the power to regenerate. And if we can get rid of this word sustainability, that'll be great. Because the Earth, we don't want to sustain a crisis. We need the ocean to regenerate. And so I'm trying to use technology on our side. And this is not a us versus them. A lot of times you hear these conversations about like, hey, this is my intellectual property. I'm not going to share my secrets. Hey, I don't know if you've noticed, but we're floating on this rock together. We need to find a way to rapidly collaborate and work together. So I'm going to close it with that.
Thank you, Jeremy. That's a great note. Marie, what are your thoughts or anything that we didn't get a chance to cover before we jump into some questions?
Yeah, I think there's a definite conversion to like financial models and financial incentives to do this work. And I think for the first time, unfortunately, because of this unemployment, we're going to actually be able to experiment with how people are incentivized to do things, because we have so many systems that are breaking and that clearly don't work. How do you gig, an agricultural farmer, agricultural system or a farmer to go with climate change incentives? How do you begin to, incentivize a worker to take the train more, right? People are going to be open to new ways of earning income. To me, that is extremely exciting. It's something that can actually be implemented immediately. And so, I'm really, kind of being the mad scientist in the back of my head going, okay, how do we begin to put together ways for everybody to start earning money in different ways, right? And how do we begin to say, okay, this is how it's going to benefit that? Because one of the things we had talked about in Earth Day, or I should say we talked about, it was a press conference because we don't see each other, but how we talked about in LA is how the climate change crisis and the COVID crisis are not really that different, right? And we need to really look at this in an urgent way. We need to look at how people live and work in a different way. And this is a really big opportunity to do that. I think there is definitely, on the other side of this crisis, is a major economic opportunity to remodel how things work, and how to put those systems together and how to get banks in on it. A friend of mine started a company called Good Money, and he focuses on, banks, working with banks that don't hurt the environment or hurt people or enslave people or support any war nations and things like that. He was one of the founders of Thrive Market. And so, how do you begin to actually put together these financial incentives? So, there's a lot of us sitting around sort of thinking about how to put that together in a different way. So I'm excited about that.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's actually a nice transition to the work that you're doing, Tom, with Earthblanc. But is there anything that, I don't know if you want to touch on that or if you want to talk about something else, but any closing thoughts from you?
Yeah. I mean, Earthblanc is, it's an interesting venture. I mean, we're we've got a company in Sweden, and we're sort of in the Nordic sort of climate fintech scene there, and got invited by the European Space Agency into their program as a space tech company, because it's kind of like banking incentives meets data meets ecosystem measurement and incentive models. So it's kind of a mashup of something we've never seen before. We like to joke we're Earthbank now. Maybe we'll be Moonbank in a couple of years. We're not sure, but no. But on a serious note, we think we've got a company in the US as well, and we want to. We've got it in India, Australia, UK. So we're a young company, and we're doing a seed round right now, and we're trying to grow. And it's tough trying to be innovative in this field, like drawing together what we're doing. But I think we're getting the traction. So we really want to try and grow as a company and ramp up, particularly to provide the incentive to these farmers in India and Myanmar and all the mangrove zones around the world, the blue zones, the blue carbon zones. That's kind of the critical timing in this next few years. If we don't kind of get in there now, okay, shrimp farms, urbanization, factories are going to concrete over them and dig them up for shrimp farming. So we kind of need urgent solutions now, and we think we're bringing part of that, and regeneration incentives is kind of definitely where it's at, but mainstreaming into like payments, so it's super easy. That's kind of where we're coming from to make it really easy for people to participate and be part of a really clean and green supply chain locally and globally. So yeah, we're looking for partnerships. So that's cool. You're coming to Australia, Jeremy. I'd love to collaborate. We've got some cool open source stuff that we want to do, and your stuff sounds perfect. So love to collaborate.
Yeah, likewise, man. My stuff's your stuff. Let's do it.
Thank you.
Cool. Let's do it.
I love it. And let's just we'll have Erika with her closing thoughts.
Oh yeah, I'll keep it brief. I think Emily, sorry, I just looking down at Emily. I think Marie nailed it. When it really is, it's a human interaction problem. So it's not ocean health is not an ocean problem. The ocean doesn't really care. It's a human problem. And technology for technology's sake isn't going to do any good. So really what we need is buy-in. So we need to be really thoughtful and careful about not only what technologies that we look at funding and implementing, but how we implement them, how we educate people, how we get feedback, and how we incentivize people to use them. And so this is really needs to be a holistic approach to this. I am really hoping again that COVID sort of reminds people how codependent we are on each other and how tentative our sort of existence here is in the environment when things change. So I think that this is a great opportunity, and I think we absolutely have to combine the human element along with the tech.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a major reset for all of us. And I'm so excited to have you guys all here, bring you guys together, have you guys connect and meet each other and see how you can also, help further some of your projects that you're working on, possibly with some collaboration even within this group. I know, Erika, there was one question about the Schmidt challenge and where people could find out more about that. It sounds like it's already in progress, so there's not necessarily a way to accept more applications. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're no longer accepting applicants. We're actually finalizing that this month and selecting them next month. But you can go to our website, which is schmidtmarine.org, and learn more about it. There's a link on there of what we fund and then the challenge itself, and read about it. And then we will also post the winners to that site. And again, we hope to continue that specific funding. And we also have ongoing funding in the other 4 areas that I mentioned before.
Wonderful. I think we may be at time. Is that correct, Emily?
Oh, wow, Sandra, that was incredible. You're right on time. I mean, what a fascinating discussion. Thank you all for beaming in from your various places. Sandra, you sure know how to moderate a panel. And you were prime time this year, a great time spot. So thank you, in all seriousness, for the very important work that you are each doing. We really appreciate it.